preface to the 50th anniversary edition of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. And so I've been writing that. And one of the things Solzhenitsyn did, which was one of the things that made that book arguably the greatest work of nonfiction of the 20th century, I mean, it's in the top 10 anyways, was to point out very clearly that the excesses of the Russian Revolution started right away. It wasn't that Lenin was a pretty good guy and then Stalin came in and corrupted everything. It was like Lenin was not a pretty good guy. The revolution got bloody really fast. And what seemed to happen, so imagine you started to divide the world up into oppressor and oppressed, right? And you're going to do something about the oppressors. The problem is that you can define people multiple ways. This is the intersectionality problem. And almost everybody can be defined in terms of their group identity in some way that makes them an oppressor. So like if you're a black man, well, you could argue that you're oppressed because you're black, but what about the fact that you're a man? And so does that make you an oppressor or someone who's oppressed? And the answer is, as the revolution progresses, if there's any dimension along which you can be categorized as oppressor, you end up dead. And so that's part of the pathology of the equality of outcome.
What do you mean
doctrine.
by that? Like you end up dead?
You end up rounded up. You ended up being put into the oppressor camp, right? And
But there's only so far you can go with that, right? I mean, you can't put all men in the oppressor camp. There'd be no men left. Like, what do you?
Well, that is exactly
so you really
the sort
think
of
that's
thing
how it plays out.
Well, it is how it plays out.
When you look for equality of outcome.
Well, it is how it played out in the Soviet Union and China. I mean, in the Soviet Union, we don't know how many people died. The reasonable estimates look like about 25 million. That's dead. That's not imprisoned. That isn't families destroyed. That's just dead. And in Maoist China, it might have approximated 100 million. That's just internal repression. And so what seems to happen as soon as you decide that the hierarchy is unfair because there are oppressors and oppressed, then you can go after the oppressors with moral virtue. But the problem is that there's almost no limit to the number of ways that you can categorize someone as an oppressor. The category just starts to expand. Like the communists killed all the socialists. They killed all the religious people. They killed most of the students. They killed all the productive farmers. And they killed the productive farmers because they owned land, and maybe a little house and a few cows. I mean, to be a successful farmer in Russia at the turn of the 20th century didn't mean you were rich, right? It just meant you weren't starving. It's like they killed all those people because they were oppressors, because they had more than someone else.
That's how they defined it in order to get the people to rally against it.
Yes. Yes, and the definition kept slipping because, well, look, even now it's like, well, let's say we rally against the 1%, and those would be the money owners, let's say. It's like, okay, who's in that group? Well, everybody in North America is in that group.
Worldwide, yeah.
Well, but who sets the parameters, right?
Well, it's $34,000 a year sets you in the 1% worldwide.
Right. So does that make all of us oppressors?
Basically, everybody who lives above poverty in America is in the 1% of the world.
Right. And also by historical standards.
Yeah.
And so the problem with the oppressor-oppressed narrative is that you can multiply the oppressors endlessly. And there's no end to going after them.
Right. And as soon as you make a definition, you can move the boundaries, and then the next person is the oppressor, and then you keep going.
Well, and you also see the interesting thing too is that, and this is complicated. So I've been thinking about this proclivity of the left to destroy members of the moderate left. It's like part of the game is that's being played, as far as I can tell, the ideologically pathological game is, I'm more virtuous than you. Now, look, if you're on the radical left and you say, well, you're more virtuous than a right-winger, it's like, well, who cares? That's obvious because the right-wingers are pathological. So being more virtuous than them, that's not much of an attainment. But if I have my moderate leftist compatriot standing right beside me and he's pretty damn virtuous, but I'm even more virtuous than him, then that's a real attainment on my part. It's a moral attainment with no effort on my part. If I can figure out some way of classifying that previously virtuous person as an oppressor along some dimension, then all of a sudden I get an increment in my moral virtue. And that happened all the time in these leftist revolutions run amok. That was just a constant feature. So it's not good. It's not good.